I would like, this is Hani Arif, Head of Neurology Department. I would like to welcome our attendees from Egypt and from outside old Egypt also, our dear neurology colleagues and students. We hope that you will benefit from these successive waves. As I explained in the previous waves, we are planning these waves bi-weekly. We started with a stroke, 3 waves, and then multiple sclerosis, another 3 waves. Now we are in the third subspecialty, which is a movement disorder. This is the second wave of the movement disorder, when we are honored to have 2 eminent speakers from Florida. I will let Dr. Ali, my colleague and the head of the movement disorder unit, to introduce them. The mic is yours, Dr. Ali.
Thank you, Professor Hani, and thank you for this great program. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Egypt. And I hope you all are well and safe. And today we'll start our second movement disorder webinar and the 8th wave of the Neuro Exhibit program. And it's my pleasure to have 2 eminent speakers from University of Florida. And we have Professor Michael Oken, the Professor of Neurology and Chair of Neurology and Executive Director at the Norman Fexel Institute for Neurological Diseases at University of Florida Health. And Professor Oken has served as a National Medical Director of our Parkinson Foundations, and he has a lot of several publications and interested in supporting patients with PD, Parkinson disease, and DBS, and also several books. And he's awarded from University of Florida and from America from President Obama for his activities and support for PD patients in USA. And the second speaker, we have Associate Professor Aparna Wagel Shakla. She is Associate Professor of Neurology and member of Movement Disorder Group in University of Florida in USA. And she is also Clinical Director of Tyler's Hope Foundation for Dystonia Research. It is my pleasure to have both great speakers, and I hope you enjoy their talks. Professor Michael Oken will talk about ending Parkinson disease. This is consistent with his recent book about Parkinson disease and ending Parkinson disease. And Professor Shalka will talk about treatment of Parkinson disease beyond medications. Now we will start soon with Professor Michael Oken. And Professor Michael, the floor is yours. It's our pleasure and honor to have you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and it's great to be able to do this, especially during the pandemic. And just want to, say thank you to Dr. Arif and Dr. Shailash for the invitation, for Dr. Shukla and I to speak to you today from the Norman Fexel Institute at the University of Florida. We wish that all of your families are safe and that we come together as a world to end the pandemic. So thanks again for having us. I'm going to share my screen here. And here we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about living with Parkinson and ending Parkinson's disease. These are 2 recent books that have just come out. Either fortunately or unfortunately, they've come out in the midst of a pandemic, so not the best time for books to hit the market, but certainly ones that we hope will help a lot of people. And all the proceeds go to charity from these books. Again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Arif and Dr. Shailash. It's an honor to be part of the Neuro Experts Academy, and wishing you all luck and good fortune with this great program that's part of the Ain Shams University. These are my disclosures. These are my National Institutes of Health grants. So I receive grants from the federal government, from the U.S. government, to support my research. And this is our new institute. So if you're ever in Florida, and I know that that Dr. Arif was recently in Florida, and so if you're ever in Florida, come stop by, see our brand new institute. We have a brand new neuromedicine freestanding hospital, and certainly feel free to, join the conversations on Twitter. Here's my Twitter handle at Michael Oken, and we interview a lot of experts on our blog, Parkinson's Secrets. So we're going to talk about these two books, and the Living with Parkinson book actually got held up in the warehouses in Canada and couldn't get out because of the pandemic. And then the book Ending Parkinson's Disease was actually originally titled, believe it or not, The Parkinson Pandemic. And so that's maybe a little bit of fun to think of that history. And for those of you that have written books, you know that publishers often change your titles. So, how big is the problem? Well, we know that Parkinson's disease is now the fastest growing neurological disorder. It's growing faster than Alzheimer's disease, faster than ALS, faster than brain tumors, faster than stroke, faster than multiple sclerosis. So, that should draw our attention. And when we think about how fast it's growing, we now know that it affects 1 in 15 people in a lifetime. And for those of you that are in school, or when you were in school, remember class sizes of about 30 people. Now imagine you and one of your friends over a lifetime getting Parkinson's disease. And so it is numbers that we are getting more and more concerned about. And if we look at projections, and these are projections done by one of my co-authors, Ray Dorsey, and Ray is at the University of Rochester. Another co-author is Bastian Bloom in the Netherlands, and then Todd Scherer, who's the CEO of the Michael J. Fox Foundation. We put together a lot of these figures and delved into a lot of research. And you can see in the epic period from 1990 to 2015, a more than doubling of Parkinson's disease worldwide. And then you see it, more than double again, and the numbers become staggering. And it's something that we need to look out for. It's something we need to be proactive on, because this could bankrupt some of our healthcare systems and dramatically affect economies, as these numbers will be way bigger than the numbers of coronavirus, as an example, deaths from coronavirus. Now, we know that the greatest advance of the last 100 years has been the doubling of the lifespan. We know that people are living longer, and we can look back. There are a lot of these. Here's a random picture clipped off the internet showing that from 1850 to 1990, more than doubling of the lifespan. This is probably the greatest scientific advance of our time. And when we think about this, we think about age as being a major factor as people get older and live longer. But we know, as we crunch the data, that age is not the only factor. And in fact, we know there are several myths that surround Parkinson's. One of those myths is that it's all due to aging. Another myth is that it's not treatable, and there's nothing to be done about Parkinson's risk. And when we think about that term, the Parkinson's pandemic, we really have to think about the word pandemic, because it derives from a Greek term, and pan means all and demos means people. And though most experts consider it to be a non-infectious entity, although there's some debate around that, it does exhibit many of the common characteristics of what a pandemic would be. And we talk about this in the book, and we introduced this concept in 2013 in another book that we put out called Parkinson Treatment 10 Secrets to a Happier Life. And so we know that pandemics extend over large geographical areas. Well, you can check that off, check the box for Parkinson. We know that pandemics tend to migrate, and the burden appears to be shifting in response to changes in aging and industrialization. We talk about this in the book Ending Parkinson's Disease, so check that box. There's exponential growth. I don't think anybody would challenge the figures that I've shown you, and no one's immune to the condition, at least that we know of. And so when we think of these as the characteristics of a pandemic, we know that the World Health Organization, who is interested in Parkinson's, by the way, we know that that this is a problem that's on the scale of a pandemic. Now, we now generally use that term, and I agree, and I think most of us would agree that that term should be used to refer to infectious etiologies like corona and polio and others. But it is interesting to think about, will we wait on Parkinson until our economies and our healthcare systems crash? So when we went through and did the research for the book, we were really interested in what it would take to end a disease or to get on top of a pandemic, get out in front. And so when we looked, we studied things like polio and HIV and breast cancer. And now recently, since the book came out, we've been studying the coronavirus response. And we realized that there is a formula that if we use this formula, we can do better. And so the things that we need to do to get on top of a disease, we would summarize as a pact. We need to prevent the disease. We need to advocate well for it. We need to care for the people who are suffering, and we need to develop new research treatments, the PACT. And so when we think about prevention, the most obvious place to go are pesticides and chemicals. And we would advocate that banning specific pesticides and banning specific chemicals is justified by now lots of studies, dozens of studies with things called odds ratios and hazard ratios that are very high, showing that when exposed to these chemicals or pesticides, the later risk of developing Parkinson is higher when we look across a population. And so that's super important to pay attention to. And the most common and widely known and widely used is paraquat. And paraquat has the strongest link to Parkinson disease, has been banned in 32 countries. But in the United States, for example, where I live, its use has doubled over the last 10 years. And if we look, this is a map of the United States. You can see these dark brown or darker regions kind of in the middle of the US. We call that the agriculture belt, where a lot of farming happens. You can see the use of paraquat going way up, but it's not the only places that we see it. And you can see that doubling in 2016, and we're still headed in the wrong direction. Now, when we think about chemicals, we have to think about things that have been spilled into the environment. And in the US, we have Superfund sites. In other countries, there are also sites, and these are sites where a chemical has been spilled in the environment, and the government has said, we need to go clean that up. So, for example, there are 23 of these sites in Silicon Valley. That's where Google lives and where all these great companies and sort of the capital of the digital revolution comes from. Tons of chemicals in the environment there that need to be cleaned up. If you ask yourself where you live, I live 11 miles from a Superfund site that has dioxin, which is one of the components of the chemical Agent Orange, which was sprayed as a herbicide in Vietnam, and that was to clear the land. And it's not actually called Agent Orange because it causes an orange hue when sprayed. It's called Agent Orange because the barrels, as you can see picture here, that they're stored in are orange. A chemical to keep on the lookout for is called trichloroethylene. It's commonly used in dry cleaning and degreasers and in industry. And if we look all the way back to the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1932, we can see Dr. Carrie McCord's comment that there's frequently failure to disclose the toxic nature of the chemical. And so this has been going on for a long time. And these odds ratios are the chances of when you get enough exposure down the road coming down with something like Parkinson or degenerative disease. Study after study is showing us that there is a problem here. And so a lot of dry cleaning plants, for example, have gone to carbon dioxide and organic solutions. So that's talking about prevention. What can we do in terms of advocacy? And so we decided that we need to learn from other diseases. And so two of the diseases that we chose to talk about in the Ending Parkinson Disease book were polio and HIV. And in polio, there was a great story because, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who everybody knows was publicly afflicted with polio. Now, since I'm talking to a lot of people in neuroscience and neurology and neurosurgery and neurophysiology, I'll tell you most people believe it's a chronic form of Guillain-Barré or chronic demyelinating polyneuropathy. But be that as it may, FDR got involved, was behind the formation of the Infantile Paralysis Foundation, and just raised millions and millions of dollars. And he brought in for advocacy people like the comedian Eddie Cantor, who would talk about this on his show, and people would actually mail dimes into the White House. A very effective advocacy campaign that has yielded the eradication of polio, or mostly the eradication of polio from the planet, according to the World Health Organization. In human immunodeficiency virus, we've learned that lesson as well, how important this can be. When I was an intern, I like to tell people that the HIV and AIDS wards were gloomy, they were dark. It didn't seem like there was an answer for this disease. You can see the advocacy groups placed a condom over Jesse Helms, who was a senator from South Carolina who kept voting against their efforts. And the sign on Helms's house says, "A condom to stop unsafe politics. Helms is deadlier than a virus." A strong advocacy effort, but it didn't stop there. They had quilts across the National Mall in Washington, D.C. They seized control of the FDA. They were aggressive. They were charismatic. They got their point across, and they increased the funding by more than 10 times into the billions and moved the needle to move that disease to something that was untreatable to treatable and chronic. So how has our response been in neurological diseases with Parkinson as one of our models? Well, I don't want to say that all of the people, including myself, that have been involved in advocacy, and you can see from my pen, I've been the medical director for the Parkinson Foundation since 2006. So I do believe that we have great, strong advocates, but overall, we still are at a disappointing level as the disease continues to grow unchecked. So we need to refuel and rethink our strategy. Now, the C impact, so prevent is the P, right? A is advocacy, C is care, and we've got to care for people today. And so this is where the book Living with Parkinson's, the one I told you about that was stuck in the warehouses and couldn't get out because of Corona, where we have lots of little tips for people to be able to live with the disease. And so as we move toward improving and maybe ending the disease for some people in the future, we've got to take care of the group that have it. And all diseases that have come prior to this, HIV, cancers, polio, have all had the same formula. So the development of care is super important. And as we think about care, we have to change our image of Parkinson. So this is from Melissa Armstrong, a paper that we put out in JAMA Neurology earlier this year, showing the old sketch of the Gowers Parkinson man, and really how that doesn't represent Parkinson anymore. Now we know there are mild, intermediate, and more diffuse malignant subtypes. We know there's motor and non-motor features. We know people like this woman featured here. You can have women with Parkinson, you can have men, you can have all races, all ethnicities, you can have on and off time. And so we've encouraged people to change their slides and change their image of Parkinson as we move forward. Within the book, we also had Bob Dean, whose wife passed away of Parkinson, take these beautiful pictures of people living with Parkinson to go with each chapter and to go with all the tips. And because we believe that people need to understand that there are folks who are living and living meaningful lives. And so some of the tips, well, you need to make sure that with Parkinson, you're not so focused on all the different types of pills and types of therapies. And I think when we get down to the heart of it, this quote from Joshua Harris, which has been really remade in multiple languages and multiple continents, this idea of the right thing at the wrong time is in fact the wrong thing, is important. And for Parkinson, we need to be teaching people worldwide that it may be less important what the specific drug cocktails are, but that we teach our practitioners and we advocate with our families and our persons with Parkinson that the timing of the therapies, whether exercise or medication, are much more important than the actual therapies that are given. Parkinson is a disease of cueing. We also have to teach people about how to keep them safe, particularly with the hospital. And here's a quote from Jared Kintz. "I have a favorite cemetery I go to because it's really clean and the doctors and the nurses are all very nice." Well, we realized, and we have this free 1-800 line for the Parkinson Foundation, 1-800, the number 4PD-INFO, 1-800-4PD-INFO, and we staff it with nurses. They're the best in class. They're awesome. I meet with them once a month to go over their questions, and they're just great at getting information out. But we realized after publishing a few papers, probably more than 10 papers on hospitalization and Parkinson, and taking all these calls and running the Ask the Doctor websites, that we needed to come up with a way for folks to be able to advocate for themselves to stay out of trouble. And so we created these free kits. We've given out more than 100,000 of them. So when you go into the hospital, it has all the things you need to do to stay out of trouble, and has little rip-off sheets you can give to your doctors and your nurses to keep them out of trouble and to make sure that you're getting your meds on time every time. We also want folks to pay attention to the neuropsychiatric symptoms, because neuropsychiatric symptoms of Parkinson are actually possibly more common, but definitely more disabling across patient groups. So more disabling than the motor symptoms like tremor. And some of the ones that we've missed are demoralization, where 1 in 6 to 1 in 5 folks, that's a lot of people, aren't necessarily depressed, they aren't necessarily anxious, but if they get demoralized, they're not going to be able to handle their disease. And we need to teach people to identify that and to try to initiate treatment to help to keep their spirits up, because they can dwindle if you miss that. Depression remains the largest unmet hurdle, as does anxiety and other mood disorders. But we also know that the specific antidepressants that we use are less important than getting the dose right and following up. And so we have to stop this practice of prescribing antidepressants, and I'll see you in 6 months or a year. We need to see you back in a few weeks, and there needs to be a plan to keep people safe from suicide and to make sure that we get the side effects and the dosages right. Now, how about research, which is the T, the development of treatments, and people are waiting. And I always think of the man or woman standing on top of the earth looking at their watch. And we know in Parkinson that it's been underfunded. In the United States, we put $3 billion, that's with a B, dollars a year into HIV. That's what moved the needle for them and prevented thousands, if not millions, from ever developing the disease. Whereas in Parkinson disease, we put about 200 million in. So we're less than 10 times the amount that we're going to need to move that needle. Why should we fund Parkinson? Well, dopamine replacement pills, as you can see here, sold as Sinemet or Matapar or other formulations across the world. These are the best treatment. However, it's over 50 years old. The treatment does not stop disease progression. We do have treatments that are on the horizon. We're focused on targeting specific genes like the LRRK2 and GBA mutations for very precision medicine approaches, deep brain stimulation, and new neuromodulatory techniques. And many of you know that's what my laboratory has worked on, for the past 20 years. Development of drugs and repurposing of drugs, and thinking of drugs that can modify things. As one of our presidents I showed you, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, used to talk about modification. And so you can see here as Radapine as a hypertension drug, inosine is a drug for gout, pioglitazone for diabetes, and then the malaria treatments are coming up as, just like in the COVID drug screens, as something that is of interest. But thinking about, could we find the needle in the haystack? Are there compounds already out there, may even have approval, that could slow the disease progression? And then, of course, closed loop deep brain stimulation. This is what we do in our laboratory. It's try to take that signal off the brain. We work on Parkinson, tremor, tics, gait disorders. Take that signal and train the device to respond to the signal in real time. And I would draw your attention to this great review article that was in Neurology, Nature Neurology Reviews, by one of our former fellows, Ahmad El-Kouzi, originally from Lebanon, is now a professor at Southern Illinois University. And he reviews a lot of these new therapies, medical and surgical, electrical neuromodulation, temporal interference, optogenetics, upregulating of nanoparticles, some of the cool things that may be on the horizon. And finally, I'll just say that the neuroimmunology is one of the most interesting areas that is expanding now within Parkinson. This is a comment by William Fuchs about vaccines being the tugboats of preventative health. And we now have multiple vaccines and multiple neuroimmunological and neuroinflammatory, and even some overlap with the microbiome and the GI and the gut coming forward. So the development of these treatments and getting the right amount of resources into them is going to be important. And we're under-resourcing these treatments. So we're using optogenetics, we're combining genetics, engineering, optics, light-sensitive molecules to control cell activity. And as Carl Dieselroth told us at our recent deep brain stimulation think tank at the University of Florida, he told us that these types of approaches can help to guide the next treatments. And then designer receptors exclusively activated by designer drugs and things that are going on in oncology will hopefully make their way over to Parkinson. And the last thing I want to mention is what we need to do in terms of developing biomarkers. And when we think about biomarkers, we can think about them for diagnosis, which is less important. I don't want to underemphasize that, but we really need a way to track Parkinson disease over time. And so this is looking at a biomarker in imaging with David Valancourt at the University of Florida. It's just one of many examples of this to track by regular MRI scans through something called free water imaging. And we have a 21 center study with the National Institutes of Health and Parkinson's Study Group set to go in 2021. And if we can develop markers to track progression, guess what? We can reduce the number of people we need to treat in individual studies from thousands to hundreds, and we can test many more therapies. So don't know if this is going to be the answer, but I hope a lot of us will be able to develop ways to track disease progression. So thanks for the invitation to speak. My colleague Aparna Shukla here at the Norman Fixell Institute at the University of Florida is going to follow my talk here with some updates in other areas that are exciting. In Parkinson, we do have a Twitter account and residency account and a blog site, and then all the proceeds for all the books, if you're able to pick them up, do go to charity. Feel free to leave us a review on Amazon or Goodreads or whatever else that you read, and we'll try to keep putting more money back into these things. So thanks again. Here's my email and Twitter account, and just, pleasure to be with you all today.
Thank you, Professor Michael, for this comprehensive talk about Parkinson's disease and the different hot topics and armamentarium to fight this disease. And I totally agree with you about the importance of more effort and more awareness about caring of our PD patients. And let me say that maybe in developing countries in Africa and our region, we may need more efforts for this. We still have shortage of medication, shortage of tools of assessment, and I hope we increase awareness and the support of stakeholders for fighting PD and improving care of our patient, in addition to participation in the research with other world countries. Should we start discussion now or after after Shakla?
Is she on yet or not on yet?
No, I couldn't see her.
Do you want to take a few questions while we wait for her to jump on?
Yes, please. I maybe my first comments or questions about you talked about pesticides, and I think also in our country and rural other countries with rural places we have problems in this. What do you think about the role of pesticides in these countries and how we protect our patients or our population from this?
So I think it's a great question. I think that that we have to begin to create a public health effort. So this effort, it needs to be. It can't just be one country. It needs to be all of us working together. And at the beginning stages of the pandemic, a number of us that wrote this book, Ending Parkinson, we were actually scheduled to appear in Luzon, Switzerland for a meeting with the World Health Organization, who's been very interested in Parkinson and its potential impacts, because it's got such a broad amount of impacts. It really does affect so many people, and it's so important that we think through this. Now, there are natural areas that we need to just get right, and some of the countries, and I have to look up Egypt and some of the nations across Africa to see how you're doing in terms of banning the different pesticides and different chemicals. But I have to say the United States is doing horrible. Just criticize ourselves. And so I think that we need to pay attention to the research that has happened, and we need to make sure that we have adequately addressed whether or not there are studies that have replication that are showing associations with pesticides and with chemicals, and whether or not those studies that we have are indeed studies that are something that we can act on. And so in the case of paraquat, as one example that we talked about, in the case of TCE trichloroethylate, these are things that countries can come together on and agree that we have enough science that we should be trying to change the course by removing them from the environment and those triggers. The other things that we need to do is we need to get more research in. And so I mentioned the United States is at 200 million a year in Parkinson. We need to be at 3 billion. And as you can see with the coronavirus, the U.S. got in at about 1.5 billion, just over the course of a year, and then stakeholders all over the world got in, started to push, the proper resources in to catalyze the efforts. And so I think if we work together, all the countries are working together, we can push those resources together. And we already have a lot of, a large, advocates that are on our side, and I think we just need to organize those a little better. And the final thing I'll say is there's a great group that actually organized a lot around the publication of the book Ending Parkinson. They were a group that was already out there called the PD Avengers, like the Parkinson Disease Avengers, like superheroes. And they now have over 1,000 members. They're represented by the world. Would love to have African and folks from your center to go to if you go to PD Avengers, if you type that into Twitter or into Facebook, Larry Gifford is their leader, and they're absolutely completely dedicated to the Pact for Parkinson and to try to move this disease across and move that needle. And so you can join the PD Avengers, get on Twitter and Facebook and get Larry Gifford. You can get me at Michael Oken. We're happy to get you in, but getting you to sign our petition, we're trying to get 1 million people to sign the petition and trying to get as many countries as we can, a multi-country effort. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir. And I totally agree with you. And also, I think the role of the basic scientist and interested in this field, I think is very crucial, important for collaboration. This part, and I think we just published a paper in Egypt and confirming the role of pesticides in developing PD. We could continue discussion after Professor Aparna talk. I think she's now joining us from operating room. We are happy to have you, and sorry for interrupting your schedule. And let me know that we are here in our group and institute are leading in DBS surgeries in Egypt. Of course, we still have few cases, but we are trying to our best to offer treatment for our patients. Hi, Professor Aparna. Are you ready for? Hi. I think you are mute.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy to have you.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, everybody here was kind enough. They actually gave me an entire OR, so that was really kind of them.
Actually, maybe yeah, a lot of our neurologists don't know about the role of neurologists in interoperative data in Parkinson's disease. I tried this sense and also I know what I mean. So are you ready for your talk?
Yes. Now, how can I share my slides? Can I share screen?
Yes, yes, please.
All right. So thank you. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes, yes.
All right.
Yes.
So, well, first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting and having me in this Experts Academy. And the talk, in the interest of time, the topic that I have picked is something that we could think beyond medications and surgery when we are treating patients with Parkinson's disease. I know Dr. Oken has already covered many aspects related to to Parkinson's disease, but I was thinking of focusing on two new facets. I mean, I'm saying new because these particularly facets of Parkinson's management have gained a lot of attention, enthusiasm, and momentum, and even evidence in the recent time, which is basically nutrition and exercise. So here are my disclosures. And I wanted to share with you that when I saw the invitation, my mind flashed back to an earlier part of my life, which I would be sharing towards the end of this talk. And I realized that I have an old connection with Africa, and I decided that I wanted to catch up. I just wanted to know how frequent or how is Parkinson's disease in Africa? Like, what is the data out there? So I would be just talking briefly about that in the beginning. So Parkinson's disease in Africa. Then I would be talking about diet, nutrition, and Parkinson's, and finally exercise. So this is one study which was a collaboration between Ghana and Italy. The paper is very interesting. They looked at two cohorts. One cohort was selected from Ghana and the other one was from Italy. And what they were trying to see is that what is the impact of starting levodopa in these patients. And as I have highlighted here, that even though there was a little bit of delay in starting the medication. However, the incidence of motor fluctuations and dyskinesias were not really associated with the duration of treatment, but rather with disease duration and higher levodopa intake. Recently, in 2020, this was the other study, which was again looking at the natural course of patients with Parkinson's disease. This is also a collaboration between the country Ghana and Italy. It was the same group of collaborators, and they followed 30 Parkinson's disease patients over 2 years, and they were trying to understand what are the differences between natural off and the off that you get when you stop medications only for 12 hours. So this paper was also quite interesting. Then there were other studies that were published, all the obstacles and opportunities. Then, of course, the LRRK2, which is prevalent in Northern African populations. So people were looking at what's the prevalence of genetic mutations in sub-Saharan countries. And turns out that LRRK2 was not as common as you would think in some of the Saharan countries. So that is what I learned. And then, of course, Nigeria, which is one of the most populous countries in Africa, they have now come up with an actual registry for Parkinson's disease. So coming to the two facets that I was talking about, diet, nutrition, and Parkinson's disease. Turns out the relationship between nutrition and Parkinson's disease runs quite long and is reasonably strong. As you can see that when you think about nutrition factors like milk, they are considered to be, there are many studies that are supporting that having low-fat milk in excessive amounts is some sort of a risk factor. It's not like positive, but it's like a risk factor. And then drinking coffee, tea, and other like having exercise are considered to be protective factors. Now, we all know that Parkinson's disease, it's a complex disease. Ultimately, it's the combination, the sum total effect of many risk factors and protective factors. Sometimes genes, if they are there, they play a dominant role. And that is what ultimately leads to Parkinson's. Coming back to nutrition, nutrition is not just related at the preclinical stage, but even as we go along, there are many aspects related to nutrition that should be taken into consideration. So I am trying to advance my slide here. Here. So this is one study that was talking about dairy foods and risk of Parkinson's. However, coming to coffee, coffee is not just considered to be a protective factor. People have considered coffee to even play a symptomatic role for non-motor symptoms like excessive daytime somnolence, or it was even considered in this big study as a potential treatment for motor symptoms. Then there is this one group from Italy again. They have looked at caffeine consumption and whether it has any protective effects. Now, of course, this was a small sample. They did find some positive trends there. So coffee is being looked at as a potentially a protective agent, not only for the causation part, but as we go along the disease. Other studies that have looked at caffeine, this was one of our recent studies just published a couple of months ago, and this was looking at two big cohorts, LUG2 mutation carriers versus those who had the disease. Turns out those who are carriers it was found that caffeine was possibly protecting them from manifesting the symptoms. Then there is another big study that looked at all the other lifestyle factors that can contribute to Parkinson's disease, including the role of nutrition. Green tea, black tea, I know in a lot of Mediterranean countries and Saharan countries, many countries, of course, they love drinking tea. So people have looked at green tea, black tea. The relationship is mostly looked at from a protective effect. There is one study from Singapore which found that black tea is probably more protective compared to green tea, but we obviously need many more studies. Then, of course, gut and brain axis. As we all know, microbiome has gained a lot of attention. The relationship between gut and brain is definitely there, and it is probably bidirectional. Maybe the gut contributes to the onset of disease, and the disease itself has effects on the gut. Investigators have looked at some specific bacteria like Prevotella, which seems to be helpful for patients with Parkinson's compared to some other microbiomes that are probably not as helpful. So that is where the concept of prebiotics and probiotics. Prebiotics are food products which help the microorganisms that are the favorable microorganisms to grow, and probiotics are actual food products that contain these favorable microbiomes. So that's the difference. But there is this whole interest at a scientific level of looking at prebiotics, probiotics, and Parkinson's disease. Now, I cannot, so when I was doing my literature search, I realized that Parkinson's disease, not only here in African Americans, but even in the African population, is not as prevalent. And I was wondering that maybe some of the protective factors like Mediterranean diet, especially in all the Saharan countries, maybe that is what is protecting them. So there's definitely a role of, there is a value of adopting Mediterranean diet because it definitely has a protective role. And that is what we advocate at our center. We have full-time nutritionists, and they see a lot of patients, and they give a lot of counseling. They go through their dietary habits, and that is what we encourage them to do. Protein and Parkinson's, all of us, we are aware of it, that protein is taking high amounts of protein can interrupt the absorption of levodopa, and that's why we ask them to take the medications 30 minutes before or 60 minutes after the meals. And of course, protein malnutrition can occur in about 25% of patients, so one has to be cognizant of that. Whether protein-restricted diet is a good idea for patients with Parkinson's, I'm not really sure about that because of the malnutrition aspect and the long-term effects of protein restriction. So nowadays, everybody prefers to go for protein redistribution. So trying to understand each patient, what time the patient is taking the medications, and avoiding the protein foods right around the time that they are actually taking the medications. However, not really restricting their protein requirements and trying to redistribute the timing of the protein-rich meals. So that is the usual approach that we adopt here, that we follow here. Moving on to the second aspect or second facet of Parkinson's management is exercise. There is a tremendous amount of interest and evidence to support the role of physical activity and exercise. And again, similar to nutrition, it starts right even before the disease has set in to throughout the course of the disease. And many studies are being performed. So what kind of exercise am I really talking about? Well, it could be simple like walking, running, biking. In general, we tell our patients that a component of aerobic exercise, which is good for our heart, lungs, bones, a combination of stretching, a little bit of stretching in their routine, and finally, strength building or weight training. So we encourage our patients to follow a combination of exercise. The problem is that patients, we always tell them that, it's a good idea to have a mixed, like a mixture of many exercises, because just sticking to one form could sometimes, the compliance could be an issue. They may lose interest. So whatever interests them, that is most important. Benefits of exercise, investigators have looked at the benefits for gait and balance, flexibility, motor coordination, endurance, cognitive benefits, sleep benefits, freezing and falls, which are like classical symptoms for advanced Parkinson's disease, improvement in mood. So there are many benefits of exercise. So here are some studies that were published in the recent times, and they support the role of exercise for motor as well as non-motor symptoms. So this is one of the recent studies which actually looked at high-intensity treadmill exercise on motor symptoms. This was a phase 2 study, and actually the same group is now pursuing. They are soon going to start a phase 3 study based on the results that they got in this particular study, which is that the patients who were following high intensity exercise, they were able to tolerate. It was quite safe, and they had good benefits. Parkinson's disease, of course, is accompanied with a lot of freezing and fall symptoms. So there are many strategies to avoid or minimize these effects: visual and auditory cueing, and certain exercises like Tai Chi and dance. They definitely have good effects on freezing and balance. I am unable to advance my slide. Yeah. So patients come and ask me, what is the role of Tai Chi? I tell them that anything that really calms them, anything that they enjoy. It doesn't necessarily have to be Tai Chi or yoga. It could be water therapy, or it could even be boxing. All of them are some sort of like stress alleviating exercises, and in that same process they also improve their balance. Even in boxing, if you see that the patients are, whoever is participating, they have to stand in a particular position, so that sort of enhances their balance ability. So all of us, we are familiar with this particular study that was published in NEJM. It is just an evidence to support Tai Chi and postural stability. But as I said, I tell my patients that they don't have to necessarily follow Tai Chi. Even yoga or any other exercises that involves a lot of balance training, they should pursue that. Dance for PD, of course, that is another wonderful physical activity which we have followed and which we find are very effective for our patients, especially participating in a group. It gives them an opportunity for social engagement. So definitely there are clear benefits for dance exercise in Parkinson's disease. Stress and mindfulness, as I said earlier, many of these like Tai Chi, yoga, Pilates, Qigong, even boxing, all of them are like mind-body sort of exercise. And this was one recent paper that looked at what are the effects of stress on Parkinson's disease, and there are clear effects. Like there are many mechanisms we can think of. It could be related to the pro-inflammatory mediators, free radicals, or it could be related to the BDNF expression. So definitely stress has direct effects on the Parkinson's disease pathology. So the same study proposed that People have looked at brain activation patterns in people who are following mindful exercise or the previous exercise that I mentioned, and they have found that there are changes in the amygdala and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Here are a few studies that they listed. And having covered nutrition and exercise, in the beginning, as I said, that I have an old connection with Africa. So this is like a transition. I'm now going away from Parkinson's. I just wanted to share my relationship with Africa. So during my middle school, I spent 3 years in a beautiful country called Uganda. And this was my school. I was surprised. When I Googled it, I was surprised to see my school. It's there. I was living in Entebbe. This is Lake Victoria, which is like the second largest freshwater lake in the world, right after Superior that we have here. And my memories about Uganda are obviously faint. I can't imagine that I could speak Swahili then, but what I remember is that I had visited the equator, which runs through this country. I had seen the origin of River Nile. Too bad I didn't really see when it flows through the Egypt. I didn't see the pyramids. That's really bad. But yeah, I just did a little bit of sightseeing within the country. And of course, I was lucky. I was able to visit an actual equatorial forest, which is really quite scary. And this is my last slide. And as Dr. Oken was mentioning, that we are really open for collaborations, and we have collaborations with many other countries. We can think of collaborations at many levels, not just Parkinson's disease, even other diseases. We have a world-class DBS program. We can be of some help at that level. We can think of research projects and clinical projects. And with this, I would like to take questions.
Thank you, Professor Shakla, for this is wonderful lecture. And I think these topics are important because whatever the availability of medication or other tools, we could just advise our patient about the diet, about exercise, as a rule, and especially continuing exercise and physical activity during COVID and its restrictions. Please, for any questions, type your question in chat or Q&A boxes, please, for Professor Oken and Professor Shakla. I have a question, Professor Oken, about first, I like your the first article about PD as a pandemic, and I hope we have like great effort like fighting COVID pandemic. There's some like good comparison between the two diseases. What about now? We are happy with vaccination all over the world about COVID. What about vaccination or targeting alpha-synuclein in for PD patients as a preventive treatment?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a great question, and I've just penned a piece last week about this idea of, what are we going to learn from COVID-19 that could apply to Parkinson, and what are we already doing? And it turns out that we're already doing a lot in the inflammatory neuroimmunological space, right? So, there are already monoclonal antibodies for Parkinson that are in trial, right? There are already multiple vaccines that are in human trial. One of the great investigators here named Benadavid M. has a patent and a vaccine for Parkinson as well, and Lewy bodies, that she's been working on for a number of years. And, she's not the only one. Lots of people are doing this. And so the real question comes scientifically, if we clear synuclein from the brains, like if you were scrubbing plaque off of your teeth, if you scrub plaque off the brains with these new therapies, will it A, have a symptomatic benefit? Will it improve the symptoms today? And B, will it affect the disease progression? And C, will it do it without adverse events? And those are all sort of unanswered questions, right now. And I think when we move forward, we have to have a way to measure this. So that's why I think some of these methods, I mentioned just one, David Valancourt's method of looking at disease progression over time. If we can measure that, that will help us to evaluate some of these therapies. So we're already using that, for example, in some of the development of the animal models of the vaccines, right? Because we want to be able to see, does it affect disease progression? And then we have to follow people out to see how it affects symptoms, right? And so I don't think it would necessarily be a cure, but if you look at what's happened in fields like HIV and polio, if you push the needle far enough, you can develop some really powerful strategies that can impact people's lives and impact the healthcare systems, reduce costs. And I'm just afraid if we don't do it, if we don't continue to invest in these things, whether that's the answer or not, if we don't get 10 or 15 times more investment down like the other diseases have done, we're not going to move that needle, and healthcare systems are going to be pushed to the brink as people are going to end up with all the morbidity with these diseases. So yeah, so I agree. I think it's really interesting. So we'll see. There's a lot of skeptics who believe we'll clean the brains off of these people and we'll have clean brains and still have Parkinson because it's too far down the road. But let's see where it goes.
But the current situation now, literature is still, we need more work to be hopeful about this.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
The question for Professor Shakla, and I think Professor Ahmed also can comment. First, I'm happy for your for any cooperation with our country and with Africa. Now, I think now we have advances and progress in research and activity and network in Africa. Thank us for MDS. Now we established section, and I think we started several projects, and I hope we cooperate together and have you in one of our coming activities for MDS in Africa. My question is, you talked about diet, and I think this is maybe in Egypt and many countries, patients ask you in different neurological disorders, what kind of food should I take or avoid? So what is your advices about this for PD patients?
So, I mean, obviously every patient's dietary habits are going to be different. We go case by case. My general, as I said, the protein restriction, I don't really push for it. I talk about protein redistribution, healthy foods, obviously, taking fruits and vegetables and nuts and grains. Actually, for patients with Parkinson's, I do encourage them to drink tea and coffee. So we don't generally talk about that in general population all the time, but for patients with Parkinson's, I do encourage them to take that. And then in patients who are having a lot of motor fluctuations, I refer them to our dietitian.
I think it's amazing seeing Dr. Shukla in an operating room.
I'm so sorry, something went into my throat.
You get a whole operating room.
Yeah. So my general approach is, of course, we take our own brief dietary history. We try to help them. We encourage them to take healthy foods, but patients who are having, like a very brittle, like the symptoms are really going, I take help of the dietitian at our center. That's my approach.
And of course, high fiber diet for constipation, something like that for patients would be helpful. And my question to Professor Oken about the role of vitamins and, this, I have some patients asking me, what about vitamins or ginkgo biloba? Some of my patients told me that I have a good mineral, I have good vitamins from America. So could it help for my disease? So what's your advice, or how?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. You'll be comforted to know that Dr. Shukla and I get this question all the time too in our own personal clinics. We get this question virtually nonstop on our 1-800-Parkinson PD info hotline at the Parkinson Foundation. And the reality is that we don't know, But we do know that a lot of folks that we have taken care of have overdone it with vitamins and have ended up with B6 pyridoxine deficiency from taking too much vitamin B, and particularly B6. We've seen toxicities from other, vitamins and supplements. I think, there's one semi-famous patient here at the University of Florida who had keratonemia from, taking too much carotene, beta carotene, and had that nice glow to them. And we have had folks that come in with bags, literally bags full of these supplements, often from companies that are independent, or the companies are kind of running, something alongside with Parkinson neurologists. And so we tell people to be careful right now. We recommend a single multivitamin. Don't overdo it with overdosing vitamins, particularly vitamins D, E, A, and K, which can build up in the system, but also B6 and others. And we recommend you save your money and talk to the Parkinson Foundation or talk to one of your major foundations to get the right information, because people are expending a lot of money into what are called nutraceuticals, which are not controlled or regulated by agencies like the FDA. So hard to know if you can trust them. So one good multivitamin is probably the answer right now.
I totally agree with you, Michael. I mean, like, we often come across patients who are just getting unnecessarily, buying all these dietary supplements that are really not needed. A good diet, like, good food, Mediterranean food is the best food. If they just follow that, they would not be having any nutritional deficiency. And running into the toxicity issue is a real big issue. So one has to be careful about that.
My question for Aparna, as you are now in the operating room, and in our center, we used to cooperate with neurosurgeon inside in the theater room and making assessment, and the patient is awake, and also we used to start by or more targeting STN. What about your experience in your center about this, about the rule in the operation? Under general anesthesia or local anesthesia? And
local. No, our patients are awake. Except for kids, or if the patients want that, they tell us. Then we decide between sedation and anesthesia. But majority of our patients are awake.
And you assessing your patient during the operation?
Yes, absolutely. So our team is a big, there's a lot of cohesion between the neurosurgery and the neurology. Like Dr. Oka and myself, there are 3 more neurologists. We all are having schedules and we go regularly to the OR. And there is the neurosurgeon and the neurologist, we talk, we discuss each case, and then we decide that where the lead should be placed. So, and that all happens in real time in the OR. So right now, this OR is not being used, and the staff over here was super nice. They said, "Why don't you use this room?" So, yeah.
I'm asking, some of the centers all over the world use now general anesthesia and without this kind of work, and we follow this in our team and in our center. And what about the preferred target? You start by STN or GBI?
So, Michael, you want to take that question? I mean, you can answer, Michael.
Yeah, so our team is actually led by Dr. Shukla that leads we have an interdisciplinary conference, and we do not believe in one target for every person. We believe in personalized therapy. We have folks see neurology, neurosurgery, neuropsychology, PTOT, speech, swallow, social work, and nutrition. And we all sit down and we talk through every case. We choose every target, whether it goes unilateral or bilateral, with or without anesthesia, the approach, the risks for each individual person. And so the targets are different. And we've done a number of articles we're happy to send to your attendees on the differences between targets. And we try to use data to drive. And one really nice article was a redrawing of the cartoon that we published originally in Archives of Neurology called The Rematch between STN and GPI, on the very first issue of Movement Disorders Clinical Practice, Williams was the first author who was a student working with us at the time. He's at Stanford now. Dr. Foda and myself and others here have redrawn those cartoons so you can kind of get a general sense, but definitely not a one size fits all, for everyone.
Okay. I think this is my last questions about for Professor Okun. About Professor Shakla talked about different types of exercises, the treadmill and dancing, but I think this is not easy in our countries, or not. Maybe you have simple patients. We need more practical. So, what is your advice about what kind of exercise you advise your patient, or should we advise them?
Right. So we have recommendations that we have put out through the Parkinson Foundation. We recommend that any type of exercise is good, and the best type of exercise is the type of exercise that you're willing to do. Most of us know that we start an exercise and then we stop, and so the best would be 45 minutes to an hour a day. It could even be split up if you can't tolerate it in that. If you can get your heart rate up, that's even better. If you can sweat some, that's better. Do things where we don't want Olympic athletes. We have people that over-exercise and actually make their Parkinson worse. And so choose something that you enjoy doing. Try to get your heart rate up a little bit. Try to do it for 45 minutes to an hour a day. Don't overdo it. We're learning stuff about the specifics, but right now I don't think anybody has those answers in a clear way. But exercise, coffee, tea, exercise, as Dr. Shukla said, they all seem to impact the brain systems that are important to providing a symptomatic effect. And then there's some data in animals and emerging data possibly in humans. Dr. Korkos at Northwestern is looking into the idea that it might have a slight effect size in actually slowing progression. And so we don't know that yet, but certainly something that we recommend. And then finally, if you can't move, because of problems with mobility, we recommend that you take up sit and fit. There are lots of things you can do where you can be seated and still actually get exercise, and that's really good for you. And so exercise was actually available to Parkinson folks before we had levodopa, and those that used it did better than those that didn't. So this has been around a long time, and we like to say exercise is like a drug.
Yeah, actually, I totally agree. And there is even evidence, like people who have looked at large epidemiological data, that people who participated in sports activities throughout their life, they tend to have less risk to develop Parkinson's. So exercise definitely, and that boredom component is so critical. As Michael said, that we can't be doing the exact same thing. It's very hard to keep the compliance. And then of course it depends on the patients that we see. Is it early stage, mid stage, advanced stage? Based on that, we have to recommend and tailor the therapy, because certain exercises may not be tolerated by advanced Parkinson's. And then of course, what are their predominant needs? If the gait and balance is a big issue, then we should try and focus on that. But in general, a combination of aerobics, strength building, strength training, which is resistance training, stretching, and then balance. So a combination of these 4 exercises are helpful.
But is using treadmill safe for our patients for Parkinson's disease, especially moderate to advanced? What do you think? Is it safe?
So I think I presented that. I know in the interest of time, I didn't spend too much time on that slide. But again, I mean, you don't want exercise is safe that you're able to talk when you're exercising. You shouldn't become breathless. That is like a general rule of thumb. But the study that was done was looking at if you reach 80% of your heart rate or 60% of your heart rate, what are the differences? So they do allow you to reach 80% of heart rate. But in general, if somebody asks me how much treadmill I should do, I tell them, of course, it is, every person is different. So how much they can tolerate, but they should be able to talk when they are exercising. If they become breathless, and of course they have to keep themselves hydrated, because Parkinson's disease patients oftentimes have hypotension, orthostatic hypotension. So I always tell them, make sure that they have lots and lots of fluids next to them, and they shouldn't really pass out after the exercise. But exercise is definitely safe as long as these rules of thumbs are followed.
I think this is the end of our questions, and I would like
Can I have last question, Ali?
Yes, sir, of course.
Uh, Thank you very much for this comprehensive presentation, Dr. Mike and Dr. Berna. You think that in the era of COVID, if there is any signal that there will be long-term side effects like the epidemic we faced in of the encephalitis lethargica or something like that, or just temporary things like loss of taste and smell and so on?
Yeah. So Rich Smaney, who's at Jefferson University, studied viruses. And in fact, we gave him a Parkinson Foundation grant. It took him several years to get the FBI clearances to use the influenza viruses, put it in the nares and the nostrils of rabbits, and recapitulated the Brock stages of Parkinson. It was a very interesting experiment. And he has studied this with his students extensively with viruses. And if you look back to sleeping sickness, von Economos, and the history of what's going on, and then you just sort of, you don't have to open your eyes too far to sort of see, oh my gosh, you know, like we've got olfactory dysfunction right on the front end of this, which, you know, really, you know, sort of get you. We got sleeping dysfunction, we got autonomic stuff. We are really concerned. You've got emerging reports. We don't know if those people were going to get Parkinson or not, and it's unmasking it. We've got some pathological reports. We've got some inflammation, and it is very concerning. So I would say, personally, I'm very concerned. It's going to take years to unravel this. My guess is we're going to see, you know, a significant amount of neurological dysfunction and some Parkinsonism that's associated with this. It's premature to say that, I think, at this moment. But if you're asking me to put my nickel down, my nickel is that, unfortunately, I think we're going to see some. I don't know what you think, Dr. Shukla, but there's several papers.
No, absolutely. I mean, these viruses have not spared any system in our body, frankly, and nervous system is one of them. Right now, we don't have like a large data. We just have some, like, you know, all of us, we have read so many articles have been published. Some, like, from a clinical perspective, Parkinson's disease patients, they tend to get worse. The levodopa requirements go up. They have a lot of fatigue. But at a biological level, as Dr. Oken said, these viruses are definitely interfering with the neuronal function. And how we can, as we said, Parkinson's disease is a complex disease. There are many factors that are interplaying with each other. So, but how to identify just one singular factor, that will require a lot of effort. So that is how I can, you know, like, if I have to comment on the virus, I'm saying definitely it is contributing to the pathogenesis, for sure.
What do you think, Dr. Arif? What do you think?
We cannot hear
you're
you.
Muted. You're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I think only time will tell. As you said, it's a matter of time, because, you know, we lived. I mean, we've seen cases after decades of the epidemic on this in the last century. So probably we might discover things which will happen after 10, 20 years or something like that. So I guess it's a matter of time. But I don't know whether there is any signals from the pathological studies or any going on studies on animals on the COVID-19 virus to prove this or not. You think that, I mean, if there is any pathological studies going on to study this on viruses?
Professor Oken,
I think you lost the last
We lost
part.
you for a second. I was just saying how much I enjoyed this, and I enjoyed hearing Dr. Shukla's stories of childhood in Uganda. So that was pretty cool. African roots.
When I saw that, I really enjoyed going back, and all my times in Uganda, I pulled out my old albums and I looked at all those pictures. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
My comment about Hani Arif questions, as I think as a specialist, we will ask every patient after did you catch COVID or not as a risk factor for PD. I think this is what should we think about, especially for patients with like younger onset of age or no family history and something like that.
Yeah.
We could add this question for our
Yeah. Although I would say, Ali, you have to be a little bit careful because historically, Schwab and Pascanzar, who were neurologists at Harvard, came up with this theory that all of Parkinson was due to the 1918 flu epidemic, if you look back historically. And they bet people, cases of scotch, if you could bring them any case that wasn't due to the pandemic. And after, I don't know if it was 15 or 20 cases, they gave this up. It's published in the American Neurologic Association proceedings. They gave this idea up. It was in, I think, Time or Life magazine. And so the presumption that Parkinson was going to disappear because it was all due to the pandemic was largely dismissed. So it's a tricky area. And, we've historically been there. So I would just say, yeah, we just have to be careful with causality. I'm not an epidemiologist, but careful with causality would be my
Absolutely.
advice.
It's just a risk factor, but not not
Yeah.
a causal factor.
But yeah,
Right.
we may very well be asking everyone. And this smell dysfunction has us all like really, our heads are really, like can't get around, that, So I will also say as an editor for JAMA Neurology that we're seeing hundreds of COVID papers every week in the JAMA networks, since this started. And so sorting through all these reports, and it's just going to take years and years and years to, but people are publishing. So at some point it'll revert to the mean and we'll have some answers, but there's going to be a lot of data for a while that it's going to be hard to interpret. Oh, you're muted, Dr. Arif.
Yeah. Thank you very much again for your time and your valuable presentation. And that was a great addition to our course. And we hope next time we will have the chance to invite you and to have you in real face-to-face.
We'd love, both of us would love to visit at some point.
Yeah, pyramids is like a wonder of the world.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, that we are planning to have the opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum next year. I guess this will be a great event. And,
well, that would be great. That'd be great. I think we'd love to do that. And, I'll just say thanks from us. And I do believe, getting back to Ali's, question, our answers here have got to be multi-country and have got to be multicultural. We can't go this alone. And so hopefully you'll see the United States coming together with other countries to solve these problems. So we're looking forward to a new generation here, and we super appreciate it. And please feel free to jump on Twitter or Facebook, or if any of you want to join conversations and things, we're happy to chat with you, and so it'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. Looking forward to future collaborations. Thank you again for inviting. Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Before I would like just to invite our attendees for the next webinar will be in 23rd December. And also we have we have busy active month this month. We have also next month, next Thursday, we have multi-center Grand Round for Africa. So please stay tuned and do now. Thank you, Aparna. Thank you, Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hani. Bye, everyone.